I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, son.
There's always a pecking order. The little peckers never mess with the big pecker. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
All right, the next era I thought we could talk about, I'll call them the Columbus years. So these were the years where, so after Arnold retired in 1975, he teamed up with Jim Lorimer, and they started promoting the Mr. Olympia in Columbus, Ohio, where Jim is from. And they really raised the whole contest sponsorship or contest promotion, I should say.
New level.
Yeah, new level. They raised the contest promotion level because they really brought in great lighting, great production values. It was really at a whole new level, where before it was very amateurish.
Right.
So, and they also opened up for the first time, this is hard to believe, looking back at it now, but they never had the prejudging open to the public.
Right.
It was always closed. And even like if you look at Pumping Iron, in the beginning of Pumping Iron, when Arnold's up there and Franco and stuff, you could see the audience. There's nobody in the audience. It's just the photographers and the officials.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great idea. Let's open this up to the public and charge everybody, it was probably $5 for a ticket back then. But I mean, how much more money did they make, having 4,000 people at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium,
Right.
charging twice for prejudging and night show,
That was a good idea. Yeah.
So now when this happened, I don't know if it's because now Arnold was no longer in it and everybody thought they had a chance, but now the attendance or the competitors really went up. So you had, in 1976, you had Franco win it. Now there was only two guys in the over 200-pound class. It was Ken Waller and Mike Katz. So that was a pretty weak class. Serge Dubray wasn't in it. Lou Ferrigno wasn't in it. But Franco and Zane had a really good battle in the under 200-pound class. And then you had Boyer Coe going in it for the first time. Ed Corney came back. You had Bill Grant come back. So it was a really, really good contest. And that was in 76. And then in 77, Zane won. And then he won 3 in a row from 77, 78, 79. And what's significant about those years, Jerry, is that now it was being covered on television.
Right.
And BBC Wide World of Sports covered it in 1977. So now it was getting, coverage. And then I think this is what really kind of started the interest in bodybuilding. And then, by the time we got into the 1980s, that was really bodybuilding's peak.
Yeah.
I think as far as public acceptance, people were discovering bodybuilding and it was really taking off.
Well, the two things stand out about the Zane years, if you want to call it that, those 3 years.
Yeah.
First of all, one of his biggest threats was Robbie Robinson.
Yes.
And the thing about Robbie is Robbie had this problem where he would look fantastic, almost like Serge, almost unbeatable a couple of weeks before the show. But on the night of the show, it's not that he looked bad, but he always looked like he had a little water retention, whereas Zane was super sharp. As you know, I think you mentioned attending some of these contests as a young
I was at all three, actually, yeah.
Yeah, so, Zane was like in peak, correct me if I'm wrong, he was in absolute peak condition.
Right.
Even though Robbie was thicker than him and had much better arms and this and that, Zane looked just much more conditioned, so he won. That's the first thing that I always think about with those years. The second thing is the famous interview where Arnold, I think it was
79.
the Wide World of Sports, I think was covering, I don't remember. They were actually covering the Olympia for TV, as you pointed out, and Arnold was the commentator, and Zane had just won the show, and Arnold has the microphone, he's wearing a suit, and he says to Zane, Zane's standing there in the posing truck, he says, "Frank, how does it feel to win the Mr. Olympia?" And Zane says, "It feels almost as good as when I beat you back in what was it? I forgot
68 at the Mr. Universe."
And and I still to this day, if you could find that video, look at Arnold's face when he said it. Arnold very briefly loses his composure, but catches himself.
Right.
Arnold did not expect Zane to say that. It was hilarious.
No, he was very mad. He was very mad.
And afterwards, I heard Arnold was furious.
Yeah.
I heard that he called Zane and said, was pissed off, really mad.
Yeah.
Zane, but I actually liked Zane saying that. It's because remember Arnold was always, playing psych games with the other guys and, talking about how they could never beat me, this and that. And it's Arnold, basically it was Arnold getting his own medicine.
That's what Zane told him. He goes, "Oh yeah, well the joke's on you. It's not so funny, is it?"
Yeah, I mean, Arnold, was he a guy who could give it but can't take it?
Exactly right,
No,
right.
if you're gonna, try and psych out the other guys and make fun of them, you're
Yeah,
gonna be able to take yourself or shut up, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So I'm glad that Zane. I always gave him credit for doing that.
yeah. Yeah, those are some great contests. I mean, I was never obviously at the Brooklyn Academy of Music like
Right,
you were because I was too
yeah,
young. But
right.
I think the Columbus shows had a similar level of intensity and the audience reaction. I mean, it
Yeah,
was the atmosphere was so electric. It was really amazing. It was really
yeah. Well, bodybuilding was already heading for its peak years.
yeah, yeah,
Bodybuilding was getting more popular. That right there, it started really
yeah,
in the late '70s, and it started to get more and more popular.
yeah.
That's when it really. I mean, the magazines were around the whole time, but for some reason, maybe it's Arnold, maybe it's Pumping Iron, I don't know, but it started to catch on much more. People became,
I think it was Pumping Iron. I think that had a big influence on it.
yeah, I think so too.
I mean, I think most of the people there, I think were hardcore fans. You know, I
Yeah,
don't think they were new people that didn't know
oh,
anything about bodybuilding, but
oh,
I think, yeah, I think Pumping Iron really brought
yeah.
way more attention. It got a lot more people interested in bodybuilding.
I mean, think about it, John. I mean, if it wasn't for, let's say, Pumping Iron, would TV would the network, a big network like ABC, would they consider
Probably
putting on?
not. Yeah,
I
probably
don't
not.
think it would have happened.
Huh.
I think it was the success of Pumping Iron that opened the door, let's say, to greater publicity uh,
Yeah,
outside of the bodybuilding. But as
yeah,
you point
yeah,
out, the truth is that most of the audience, and I think this still holds true today, is almost, I would say, at least 98% hardcore bodybuilding fans.
yeah.
As still, they want to see the hardcore, like you see some of the guys today, some of the big guys like this guy, what's his name again? Uh, what's his name? Nick Walker, Big Ramey, these kind of guys.
Mm.
I mean, you know, the average person, even a lot of bodybuilders will say, "Oh, these guys are too big." I mean, but the fans, the hardcore bodybuilders, the way their perception is, the freakier and bigger these guys look, the more I love it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
They want to see that.
yeah,
It's like the famous words of Wayne DeMilia after the 1990 drug test in Olympia, when I said, "Oh, Wayne, are you going to continue to drug test?" Absolutely not. He says the quality was down, and these are the words that I'm referring. He says people want to see freaks. Those are
yeah.
the exact words. And it's
Right.
true. The hardcore fans want to see as much muscle as possible.
Well, if you go back to 77, the year Pumping Iron came out, that's also the year Arnold came out with his book, Education of a Bodybuilder, and he was promoting that thing all over the country. So I think the combination of those two things really brought up the interest in bodybuilding. And that's probably, you're right, that's probably why ABC, why World of Sports wanted to get involved. And not only were they involved, but then CBS Sports Spectacular, which was basically the same thing as ABC, Why World of Sports. They had their own sports show. They outbid um, Wide World of Sports, and they signed a 3-year deal with them. And I
Oh,
think it was 30,000 or 50,000 a year they were paying Arnold and Lorimer to film the show.
yeah,
And it was 79, 80, and 81.
yeah.
And then of course 80 and 81, which we'll talk about in a second when we get to those shows. They never even did it. So they signed a 3-year
Yeah.
deal. They had to pay every year, even though they didn't.
Right. But there's two men that you have to give credit for really kind of spreading or increasing the popularity of bodybuilding. The first would have to be Joe Weider. There's no question about it.
Yeah,
Joe, through his magazines and his publicity of the bodybuilders and his focus on bodybuilding rather than, let's say, Olympic weightlifting like the York magazines did,
yeah,
Bob Hoffman Strength and he kind of helped popularize bodybuilding. But Arnold himself, when he came on the scene, again, with the Pumping Iron movie, his book, and the segue into the movies, where not only bodybuilders, but everybody saw this, great physique of Arnold, Conan, all those movies,
yeah,
Terminator. I mean, that caused bodybuilding to soar through the stratosphere for a while. I
yeah,
mean, that really, Arnold's influence to me was comparable to kind of what Steve Reeves did many,
yeah,
many years before playing Hercules, because I mean, God knows how many people he inspired, including myself,
yeah,
to get into body. When I saw Hercules as a kid, I was dumbfounded by this guy's. I had never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole persona of Steve, this handsome guy and tiny waist, and just fantastic. I couldn't wait to start working out. You know what I mean?
But
Like,
I think what made Arnold different than Reeves was that he would go on these talk shows and he
Yeah.
would explain what bodybuilding is, and he would
Exactly.
make it more, palatable, I guess, for the general public, where people could, oh, I understand it more now. I get it. Where before it was thought of as this really weirdo sport, nobody would even look at it. And Arnold made it like kind of cool and kind of like, hip and all that. And then it became like cool to work out. And then everybody started getting into that.
Like, absolutely. Arnold's personality and as I said to you a long time ago, we did an interview a long time ago. Arnold stood out among the bodybuilders of that era because he was the only one that really had the personality.
Yeah.
Like the Tonight Show, and had this self-deprecating humor where he could make fun of himself. Frank, all these guys were great guys. Frank, Zane, Dave. They didn't have Arnold's.
They wouldn't have been able to do it.
What's it called? This
Charisma.
charisma and let's say open personality to do that kind of. They just didn't do it. So it was necessary for a guy like Arnold to be around to increase the popularity of bodybuilding. I do believe.
I remember being in high school and I was into bodybuilding and I would watch Arnold on the Tonight Show. And this was before he was Conan, way before, a couple of years before. So he wasn't a movie star yet, but he would just go on there as a bodybuilder, usually when he was doing one of his books or something.
Right.
And even as a kid, as a teenager, I was so impressed that Arnold had so much confidence being on the Johnny Carson show, which was a big deal.
Yeah,
I mean, I think most people going on the Johnny Carson show would have been a nervous wreck because it's watched live, right? Or it was, I don't know if they taped it, but it was watched by millions of people. It was the biggest show at night, for sure. It was the biggest talk show in the world. And it was a big, big deal. And he would go on there like, no big deal. Like he would just cross his legs and he'd be joking with Johnny and he'd joke with the other people on the show. And I remember sometimes other shows he would do, the hosts would be kind of nasty toward him and they would like try to make jokes and he just laughed it off. And he knew how to handle these people. He'd get right back at them. He was so quick, and he was so confident.
Is this always what you wanted to do after bodybuilding?
It wasn't clear when I was a kid what I wanted to do, but I knew that bodybuilding was a means to an end, and it would open up a lot of doors and opportunities. So
did you ever consider secretarial work?
I did, but my typing wasn't that good.
Typing wasn't that good. Now you mentioned you're trying to. Did you say lose your accent or what?
No, it's just that you always have to work on it to be totally understandable out there.
Well, you don't want to lose it, though, do you?
No, it's not important to lose it. I think that some people think it's attractive. Other people think it's very sexy, which I don't blame them for saying so. I think it has a lot. I used to do bench press with over 500 pounds and squats. The kind of training that you do right now, basically, I couldn't believe the way you broke this jacket.
Thank you very much.
That was too much.
She's a lovely woman.
She's wonderful. She's the best thing that ever happened in my life.
Now, how does the rest of the Kennedy family feel about you? Not that you aren't a great guy, but... I mean, how did you know what I mean?
It's the best thing that ever happened to the family.
I think people today who don't know who Arnold is, they don't realize the impact that he had on promoting bodybuilding. Because like you said, Jerry, no one else could have did that. Lou Ferrigno could have did it. Frank Zane could have. Franco couldn't have did it. Nobody.
I remember when Chris Dickerson went on the Tonight Show. Remember that?
Yeah, when he used to work there, right?
Yeah, Chris was a page at NBC. And Johnny Carson, I remember one night he's looking at the camera. He says, I just found out we have a page working for us who's Mr. America. He says, let's bring him out. And, Chris comes out and he poses. And Chris always looked great. And Chris was very well spoken.
Yeah.
Had a great voice, was a very intelligent guy. But you could see Chris, unfortunately, was kind of intimidated being on TV. If you know Chris, you know that you could see he was not him, he wasn't as open as Arnold, let's say, could be.
Yeah.
So that's underscoring what you're saying. You needed a guy as extroverted as Arnold to like I say, they can insult him, it would roll right off him.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the other guys would.
I remember being like I said, I was a kid, but as a bodybuilder, I was like, yeah, you show him, Arnold. He was like standing up for all of us. He was promoting bodybuilding, but if they tried to get at him and say, I heard, bodybuilders are stupid, or he'd be like right at him. I'm like, man, that guy was like, he could handle himself better than anybody.
And not only that, Arnold got people involved in weight training who weren't necessarily interested in being bodybuilders.
Right.
Because Arnold would often talk about the health benefits.
Yeah.
And remember back then, the health benefits still weren't really scientifically widely circulated. Arnold would talk about it anyway. You lower your body fat, it's good for your heart, this, that. And later on, all this was confirmed.
Yeah.
But, somebody watching that, because Arnold basically looked like a big, healthy guy, and they say, maybe I should look into this weight training. Maybe it would be good. He probably got a lot of people lifting weights only because of the fact they would help them. Maybe these are people that weren't interested in being bodybuilders.
Right.
Only to help improve their appearance. Arnold even got women involved. He wrote a book for women.
Yeah.
Lisa Lyon was in. I remember.
Yeah.
It was
1979. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he even got women involved in weight training. I mean, so Arnold was a fantastic spokesman. Probably the number one ever in bodybuilding. I have to.
He was for sure, no doubt.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the next era in the Mr. Olympia, and I would call these the controversial years. So this was 80 and 81, and I think these two contests being back to back really stood out because you had Arnold come back after a 5-year layoff, and then Franco came back after a 5-year layoff, and they both won. And they were both really, really controversial. To this day, still the most controversial Mr. Olympias ever. Yeah. How much do you think those shows hurt bodybuilding? Because it was starting to gain some really mainstream popularity. And, we mentioned CBS Sports Spectacular, and they actually went down to Australia in 1980 and filmed the show. And then they actually didn't even put it on. They went through all this expense, bringing a camera crew to Australia, filming it, and then they just shelved it. They didn't even put it on. And then in 1981, they didn't even go. Right. They said, we'll pay you the money. We owe you the money. We signed a contract, but we're not going. We're not even going to film it.
Well, I think my opinion is that the 80 and 81 Olympias, to this day, the previous most controversial Mr. Olympia was that 72 one in Essen.
Yeah.
When, these two, to me, to my mind, these still, after all these years, still are by far the most controversial judging decisions. Now, as I said, right after the 80 Olympia, I ran into a couple of people who competed. I don't remember, was Frank saying, a couple other people who told me that, I'm not sorry, that was the Essen one. But the 81, I remember looking at the photos, and there was already stuff going around that Arnold shouldn't have won. Mm-hmm. And my first impression when looking at the pictures was definitely Arnold was not the same as he was in the, let's say, 73, 74. He was definitely off. However, in some poses, he still was extremely dominant over the other guys. Mm-hmm. I mean, when he did, let's say, the side arm pose like that, his arm dwarfed everybody. Even Boyer Coe, who had fantastic, the only guy who came close was Boyer.
Yeah.
In that shot. I mean, but like his legs, they talk about his legs. His legs were really down compared to the way he was. I mean, as you pointed out, in 73, his legs actually were better than usual. They weren't just passable like Larry Scott's were. They were spectacular development he had.
Yeah.
Whereas in Sydney, they were barely passable. I mean,
right.
And the thing is, though, that, you could say that he shouldn't have won because of that, but in some poses, when I've since then, I've looked at a lot of photos from the show, and his upper body, again, was not like it wasn't said, but it was still good enough where it still might have been up in the air. In other words, there were a lot of people who, and I think you've interviewed some of these people, where they say that, Arnold wasn't at his best, but he was still good enough to win. That's the frequent statement.
That's why I think, what are we on, 43 years, 44 years later? I think it's still debated.
It's still debated.
Just because of what you said, Jerry. It's like sometimes some people think, he wasn't at his best, but he was still good enough to win. Other people feel like, no, he shouldn't have won. And it's just these two people going back, these two sides going back and forth. And that's why it's still so debated. Where I think 81, I think everybody agrees. I have never heard anyone say Franco should have won.
No, that was definitely off. But now in the 80, let's put it this way: if I were a judge, would I have had Arnold first? And the answer to that is no, because I knew how Arnold looked in the past. And as I say, the way the Mr. Olympia is judged, the current Mr. Olympia, Arnold, even though he wasn't the current Mr. Olympia, he had the track record of several Mr. Olympia titles. He would be like the standard to judge the other guys on.
Yeah.
And since Arnold was off and not at his best, I would have to look at the other guys and say, well, how does Chris Dickerson, Frank Zane, the other guys, are they at their best?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is the other guys, especially Chris was at his peak condition. He wasn't not nearly as big as Arnold, but he had a far more complete body.
Right.
And I remember when they turned to the back pose, yeah, Chris was a lot smaller than Arnold, but his back, strange you looked almost as wide as Arnold. I mean, he looked great. I mean, he
Not
had
only wide, but it was thick, it was cut.
Yeah,
You know, like you said, it was a trained physique. You know,
it was a trained physique, and Frank and some of these other guys, including Mike Mentzer, I mean, they were in peak condition. Arnold was not.
Right.
I mean, you can't, you could say, well, Arnold won because he's Arnold. A lot of people have said that he won because of the aura and the, this thing about Arnold. He won because he's Arnold. That's not fair. You can't, you have to judge a guy as he looked that night. I would have had Arnold probably somewhere around sixth place.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy to say that, but if I was there in person, maybe I'd have a different opinion. But I'm judging by the many, many photos and a couple of videos I've seen. I would have had Chris Dickerson ahead of him. I'm not sure I'd have Mike Mentzer, but probably and Frank Zane ahead of
Boyerko.
Boyerko definitely. These guys I would have had it because they were that night were in more peak condition than Arnold, and that's what I was judged by.
Yeah.
As far as the 81, that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
That to
I
me,
agree with you about 1980 because if it was where Arnold was good enough, but he wasn't at his best, but he was good enough, then there wouldn't be all this controversy. There wouldn't be all those competitors complaining. There wouldn't be all the people in the audience complaining. I heard there was a lot of booing. There wouldn't have been all that if Arnold was good enough,
Just imagine, John, what if Arnold showed up looking exactly like he did in 74? Would anyone ever say anything?
Oh, no. I think everybody agrees with that. Yeah.
Arnold would have destroyed them. It would be like when Coleman used to walk out on his peak years when everybody would go and say, okay, it's over. Let's see who's going to get second on that.
But like you said, Jerry, in a couple shots, even like standing relaxed, because he was so much taller and wider, he does look like he could have won.
Yeah, that's right.
But when you start looking at the total body and you start seeing these guys like Dickerson and Zane and Mentzer and Boyerko that were completely developed, they might not have had the genetics Arnold had, but they were completely developed. I can see why there's so much controversy because a lot of those guys probably should have beaten Arnold because they had complete physiques,
That's my point. Yeah. Now, as far as 81 goes, that's a whole different ballgame. 81 was the most ridiculous. If you said, what is the single most ridiculous Mr. Olympia contest? Unhesitatingly, I'd say 1981.
Plus, I think 81 was everybody was on eggshells going into that contest because of what happened in 1980. Because I was at that show, and I remember I was debating on whether to buy tickets for the contest because I heard nobody was going to show up.
Didn't people like Chris, a couple of competitors like Chris, they didn't even want to compete that year? Am I right?
Chris did, but Zane didn't, Boyerko and Mentzer didn't.
Okay, because they saw the handwriting on the wall. Is that?
In fact, they tried to get everybody to sign a letter and boycott it.
Wow.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of people did sign the letter, but then a lot of people went back on their word and went.
Yeah, that's what happens in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
I mean, no, Franco had a fantastic upper body. I mean, the pectorals, the back, but I mean, he didn't have you were there. I mean, to me, he looked like he had no definition in his legs at all.
Yeah, none.
None. I mean, I know he had that refrigerator.
And I think after the prejudging, everybody was feeling like, okay, they're not going to do this again, are they? They're not going to have another controversial after what happened last year in Australia. They're not going to do this again.
Right.
So I think, like I said, everybody was really, there's a lot of tension on what was going to happen because it was clear what was on stage was, you had Platts, you had Padilla, you had Calendar, those three guys alone. And then you also had Dickerson, who was maybe not at his best. He wasn't as good as 1980, but he was still better than Franco.
Right.
But they all had great legs. All four of those guys had great legs.
Danny Padilla was fantastic that year.
Even Calendar had great legs,
Well, was in great shape. I mean, all these guys, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading somewhere that even Joe Weider was pissed off about
He
that
walked
guy.
out. He walked out after the
I
decision.
can imagine Joe Weider walking out of that.
Weeder and Arnold did not go on stage and hand Franco his trophy.
Wow. I mean,
You notice all the pictures with Arnold and Franco with the trophy, they're backstage.
wow. That really tells you something right there.
Yeah.
But the question is, was it, this is the lingering question about that show. Was it fixed for Franco? I mean, who
Well,
was
they've
it?
got the judges' score sheets so everybody could see them,
Yeah, I mean, what was the rationale? I'd like to know of the judges to pick Franco over those other guys like Padilla and the guys you mentioned.
Yeah, I think what it was they had that point system, and 20 points was the highest you could award somebody in a round, 20 points. And you could give out multiple 20 points. You could give out multiple 19s. It wasn't like the placement system where you had like first, second, third, fourth. So you could give a guy, if you saw like, I'll give Padilla a 20, I'll give Franco a 20.
Okay.
And I think because of who Franco was, because he was a former Mr. Olympia, and him and Arnold were like legends, So we're not going to put these guys fifth, there's no way.
Yeah.
But let's give him a 20. He's in good shape. But I'll also give Tom Platz a 20.
Right.
And I think enough judges did that where maybe not everybody had Franco in first, but at the end of the day, after they got done adding up all the scores, Franco was in first.
Yeah. But it's interesting when you think about it, both Arnold and Franco, Arnold didn't deserve to win in 80 because he wasn't in top shape and his legs were considerably off.
Yeah.
And the next year, Franco had, again, great upper body, just as good as he did when he won the Olympia before, but legs were terrible.
Yeah.
They both had no leg development.
No legs, yeah.
I mean, Mr. Olympia, I'm sorry, has to have a complete
right. Especially by the 1980s because it was different than the 1970s, right?
Yeah.
You had more guys with better legs.
I mean, today it's gotten even worse.
Oh yeah,
today,
yeah.
When you have the Olympia, not only do you have to have fully developed front thighs, but I mean, like back then, the guys that even Arnold, their leg biceps were never really that spectacular.
No.
But today, when the guys turn to the rear, they got to have these on the side. They got to have these massive hamstrings.
Yeah.
They have cuts going down their leg, the back of the. Even they have
the 1980s. It was a whole different scene.
Yeah, I mean they have to have defined. I saw a picture of this guy. What's his name? One of the guys who's might be a guy named Theo Longaria or something like that. He's from. He got last year. He got 13th place. He's from France. He's one of the guys that qualified for the Olympia. I saw a picture of him online where he did a naked photo of himself from the back. It must have been on his Instagram page, and he had his butt there, but it was just shredded.
Oh yeah, you got to have shredded glutes now. Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of the time I was on a plane to Columbus for the Arnold show. Do you remember when Flex used to have those pull-out photos? And I had the new Flex in my hand. I was sitting next to Bill Dobbins. He was a photographer and writer. And I pulled out, there was Debbie something or other. You remember that girl from the back? Debbie Mugley. There was a pullout of her. And, they had this brief period where for some reason in Flex, they were using nude photos of female bodybuilders from the back, right? Now, the photo of Debbie Mugley, she was lying on her side from the back, naked, but her glutes were absolutely shredded. So, and I turned to Bill Dobbins, who had taken the photo. I said, Bill, this is the first time I've ever seen a photo of a naked woman where I didn't get turned on. And Dobbins' response was, you're not supposed to be turned on.
It's just muscle.
Just muscle, exactly. So that's the kind of feeling I got when I saw this French guy's photo.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, to me that, I mean, come on, it's crazy. It's fine. I mean, geez, I don't know, amazing.
So do you think those years of 80 and 81 hurt bodybuilding as far as the general public goes?
I don't think
it
so.
set the sport back? No,
I don't think so. I think it created kind of a stench among bodybuilding fans for a while, and still does to this day.
What do you think if Arnold and Franco didn't go in it, and CBS would have filmed both shows, and what kind of impact do you think that would have had as far as the Mr. Olympia goes, as far as the general public? I mean, because if 77, 78, 79 Olympias were all on TV and they were promoting bodybuilding and it was, a positive image. I remember it, like even being in Columbus, it was even in like, it was on the news, like the local news, and it was in the newspaper the next day and stuff like that. So it's starting to get like mass media attention, where it's in newspapers and magazines and not magazines, but newspapers and television. So what if somebody else would have won 80 or 81 and Arnold and Franco wouldn't have won in it and he wouldn't have had all that controversy? I wonder if it would have kept advancing the sport,
I think it would have definitely helped the publicity of the sport.
Yeah.
Those if those contests had been, let's say, judged more fairly, I think
let's just say they weren't in it,
Yeah, they weren't in it.
It was just a regular Mr. Olympia.
I think that then there would have probably been no controversy at all. I don't know who would have
Oh,
won.
I know there would. Yeah, I just wonder, like, if it would have made the sport more popular or
Probably.
better on TV and stuff,
I think it would have gotten more TV coverage for at least a couple of more years, and that
Yeah,
felt
I agree.
that greatly promoted bodybuilding.
I agree. Yeah.
The loss of the TV definitely hurt. So yeah, those guys not being in it would have helped.
Yeah, because that was before the internet and streaming.
Yeah,
So I mean, the TV was a big deal, and
yeah, for the general public, that was
it
everything.
stopped. It stopped
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah, that's everything. Yeah. So yeah, I agree. It would have helped bodybuilding if those guys hadn't competed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I guess the next era, Jerry, I guess we call it the in-between years between the controversial years and between the Lee Haney years, and that would have been 82 and 83. So you had Dickerson win in 82, and then you had Samir win in 83. So you had two winners, and they were smaller guys. They weren't big guys like Sergio or Arnold, and it was, I guess, fairly judged. I think. I mean, some people thought Dickerson shouldn't have won. Some people thought other people should have won, but I guess Dickerson, they felt like he deserved it after taking two controversial seconds in a row.
Yeah.
But it was basically a back on track, I guess,
Right.
82 and
Well, a lot of people over the years, and I still see this, they called Chris Dickerson the worst Mr. Olympia.
Yeah.
They said he didn't deserve the title. All right, Chris had weak biceps, but I mean, if you look at his overall physique, I think when he was in shape, he was an incredible bodybuilder.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
He wasn't the biggest guy, but first of all, he had great stage presence. He was a good poser, always looked confident, and not only that, but he had a head-to-toe body where when he stood relaxed, he looked like he had literally no weak points. The only weak point show up when he would flex his arm, and you see the weak bicep development. He had a great back. He had good shoulders. I mean, I think Chris Dickerson is very underrated. And yeah, he wasn't tall. He was like Arnold. He wasn't a big guy, but he had a complete physique.
Yeah.
And again, I hate to be redundant, but to me, I keep saying Mr. Olympia needs to have a complete physique.
Yeah.
And Arnold, and nobody's perfect. Chris had weak biceps, true, but he had pretty good weak biceps, but he had pretty good triceps.
Yeah, you good side triceps.
You see his side tricep wasn't bad.
Yeah.
I think he definitely deserved to win the Mr. Olympia. I think people are wrong because they put him down because he wasn't the biggest guy. But
yeah. Well, I think the people saying that too, they don't know his career. They haven't seen pictures of when he won the Navy Universe or when he won the America. They don't realize the extent of his career and all those shows he won.
Plus, not only that, but unlike them, they never saw him in person in shape.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I mean, photos and videos give you a certain impression.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit different when you actually see the person right in front of you.
That's true. Yeah.
See the way the guy looks. And let me tell you, when this guy was in shape, Dickerson, he was fantastic. He looked almost unbeatable. I mean, he looked great. Yeah. Everything looked great on the guy. He was in fantastic shape.
When I think about those contests, so now I should also mention after 1979, starting in 1980, they started doing just one class. They didn't have an under 200, over 200. But when I think of 83 or 82 and 83, I just think about the wide variety of physiques that were up there. You had smaller guys, you had bigger guys, you had symmetrical guys, you had more massive guys. And then it was just like they were all thrown together. And this was before I think the mass monsters really took off and before the judges started going just for mass. So you had a guy like McAway who could place really good. You had a guy like Samir who could win.
Yeah.
Then you had Frank Zane was still competing in both of those shows. This was the end of his career after he won the Olympia 3 times. So
Yeah.
it was just amazing. I think those shows are very interesting to look at because you had such a variety of physiques, and they were all put together, and then the judges had to decide. And then they were also had 3 rounds of judging.
Right.
And the first round was symmetry, the second round was compulsory posing, the third round was posing, and they were all judged. The posing was judged too. That's why you could have a guy like McAway place high because his posing was so fantastic. So this way, I think it was those were great examples of what bodybuilding could be if you judge the complete physique, if you judge symmetry, if you judge size, if you judge posing, and you judge everything. That's an example of what it could have been, but then they let it, I think, kind of go off the rails.
Well, those years were examples of when the physique, the number one quality that was looked for was quality.
Yeah.
Conditioning, the emphasis wasn't on the biggest arm. I mean, to give you a perfect example, when Samir, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you know about this better than I do, John, but wasn't Bertil Fox in that contest?
He was in both of them, yeah, both of those.
And Bertil Fox was one of the early mass monsters.
He was, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Nobody could say Bertil Fox was small.
Right.
This is another guy, by the way, that you had to see in person to really appreciate.
Yeah, I bet.
And he was huge, this guy. I mean, he was thick, like he had a physique. I remember looking at this guy and saying, you could shoot this guy with a bullet. It looked like it would
never go through.
He was so damn thick.
If you hit him with a car, he'd dent the car.
I saw him getting ready for a photo session at Gold's Gym when it was on 2nd Street. And, they used to use these fake balsa wood dumbbells that weighed about maybe a half a pound for they looked like they weighed 100 pounds each, right?
Yeah.
They used it for the photo sessions. And I saw him, he's standing in front of the dumbbell rack and he was doing these curls. And I said, oh, look at that. He's doing the balsa wood dumbbells. And I looked closer. John, they were 85-pound dumbbells.
Wow.
And he was curling it like this, like they were 40s.
Nothing, yeah.
And I said, holy Toledo, look at the strength on this guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I mean,
yeah, he took 7th and 5th in those shows. So that goes to show you they weren't putting mass above everything else.
That's my point. That's my point. In other words, later on, Berto probably would have done a lot better than
he was ahead of his time.
Even though you had guys like McAway and Samir being in such superlative shape, they would be considered too small. And Frank Zane, the emphasis completely shifted. I don't know what year that would be. We have to figure that out. It slowly shifted to size being of paramount importance.
Yes.
Meaning that if you have a big guy who's in good shape compared to a smaller guy who's in better shape, they're going to still give it to the bigger guy, and that's the way it is to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, you have shorter guys winning like Hardy and Derek, but they're still kind of big guys.
Oh, they're very big guys.
These are big guys.
Yeah, they are not small at all. No.
I mean, as great as he was, there's no question Frank Zane was one of the greatest bodybuilders. I'll always credit that. Frank wouldn't do shit today. I'm saying,
Well, like you said, Samir in '83 was one of the best physiques ever, and he wouldn't do shit today. He wouldn't do shit.
Maybe there's an outside chance that Frank and Samir in the classic bodybuilding,
right,
they might make the top 3.
But now they categorize it. Where back then it was all the same concepts.
No, you're right. No, but today you're right. And Samir in '83 was one of the most peak bodybuilders ever.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at photos of him, and I saw him at the time. In fact, I was kind of helping him a little bit prepare for that show. But I remember his cheeks literally was so. I mean, if you saw him in person a couple of days before the show, his cheek was so sunken in. It looked like there was nothing left there.
Yeah.
I mean, and I remember touching his abs, John. I touched his abs, and they felt like steel.
Yeah.
Didn't feel like human flesh.
Yeah.
There was literally no fat there at all.
Right.
So Samir likes to tell people he was 1% fat. I mean, I doubt it. I don't think that's true. But I'll tell you what, the man was as low body fat as you could possibly get.
Yeah.
He had no fat, and his back was, oh my God, was his back great. Fantastic. Yeah. And Samir had good calves. He had that complete body look.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I say, he had, just like Chris, he had an overall quality physique. There's no question about it.
Yeah.